Welcome everyone to InsurTech Rising Live. Over the course of this week, we will be bringing you a range of webinars, thought leadership articles, as well as our first e-magazine of 2019. Remember to visit the InsurTech Rising 365 blog for all Digital Week content. Today, we are exploring how InsurTech investment trends shape innovation strategy with Tuan Ouyang, venture partner at Information Venture Partners, and Anthony Lee, CEO at Notions Research. We will be live tweeting this webinar, so you can join in the conversation using the hashtag InsurTechRisingLive. While our webinars this week have been pre-recorded, you can still submit questions during the presentation. Send them to us using the Ask a Question module on your screen or by tweeting us. We will be passing these on to the presenters and coming back with a unique article featuring the answers. You will also notice that we have compiled a resource list of all of our webinars. Feel free to download and click through the information we have created for you. I will now hand over to Tuan.
Thank you, Rocio. This is wonderful. We're so excited to be here. My name is Tuan Huynh. I like to say that I am a recovering fintech founder. I am now a venture partner with Information Venture Partners, and we invest in early stage B2B software as a service technologies for financial services. And we're so excited to be on this webinar with one of our more recent partnerships with Notions. With that said, I'd like to introduce Anthony Lee, who is CEO of Notions. Anthony?
Hi, thank you again for having me, and it's a pleasure to be on here. Good to be chatting, Juan. So I am the founder and CEO of Notion, and what we are is an AI company that serves health insurers. We help them make use of health data at large, both internal health data and then external.
Wonderful. So as Anthony alluded to, and as you can see here, we're excited to be discussing trends in technology adoption over the last 3 years around InsurTech, specifically looking at the trends within the spend and the flow of cash flowing into InsurTech, and the regulatory and adoption landscape that will shape the next 3 years from here on out. So I'll just start this conversation with a really nice quote from CB Insights, our very good friends over at CB Insights. And it's one from a technology firm that is looking to service financial services. One of their corporate strategists said, you know, we really use the understanding of investments to find emerging trends and interesting companies that is signaling a shift in how our customers are reallocating resources and shaping their investment strategy. So it's a very good way to kind of think about this. And so let's go right into the next slide, Anthony. You know, at IVP, we've been tracking investments in fintechs over the last 2 decades. And what's really been interesting is that I don't think it's news to anyone that fintech investments has been one of the most exciting segments for both investors, startups, and incumbents alike. Looking at this chart from CB Insights, you can see that the category has had a historically high amount of funding, but in particular, in 2017, investments in fintech generally exceeded almost $31 billion globally, which is pretty exciting for those of us who work in this field. But the interesting thing is in 2017 and late 16, the investments in InsurTech actually eclipsed those of other subcategories within financial services technology. So very, very exciting for us, for those that watch it. And I think what, you know, clearly as we look at where the money is flowing, we know that in the year 2018, just last year, it's ballooned up to 2.56 with over 19 InsurTechs raising and getting over about 30 million. I mean, it's pretty significant, right, Anthony? This is like wonderful, I'm sure, for you, especially as you're creating a new niche category within InsurTech and AI. And I'd like to just make a quick comment about how, you know, if you look again at the makeup of the investors in this space, CB Insights was tracking how many were actually corporate venture arms versus true venture capitalist firms or private equity firms, and they were seeing that over 33%, so almost a third of the investments made in 2017 actually came from a corporate venture arm. So it was sort of interesting to see this shift, right? So I'll just share some anecdotes around here. Looking at AXA as a story to kind of follow. AXA recently rebranded themselves to AXA Venture Partners. And what that meant was really they were shifting away from a pure accelerator model to go into more of a venture model. And so you're seeing that dollar kind of jump in, of course, and no one can include the Ant Financial investments of over 14 billion in Asia, right? So also a very interesting thing to look at. So I'm not going to bore you too much. So let's go on to the next slide, because I do want to get to the meat of notions and sort of, Anthony, what you're doing in your space. So, in particular in InsurTech categories, we've sort of been seeing this sort of unbundling of the insurance value chain. And what do I mean by unbundling? I mean that specific areas in the core versus the back office or the front office has really been innovative and sort of been changing through the innovation that's happening in the InsurTech space, and then slowly flowing over as the InsurTechs and insurers are collaborating more together. And so you kind of see this interesting circular, synergistic relationship, if you will, between the innovation that companies like Notions is doing and pulling it back over to insurance companies and their use. And I think one of the questions we look at a lot is like, what's really been changing in the last 3 years around InsurTech investments, and as a result, InsurTech adoption strategy. And what we're seeing is, I would say the last 5 years prior to this, you're seeing a lot more innovation in what we call front office, right? So things such as digital transformation around customer journey, sales strategy, agency engagement or distribution technologies and platforms. And now, again, very exciting, you're seeing sort of more innovation in the unsexy stuff, as I like to say, things that are core, processing, underwriting, dynamic pricing, more sophisticated claims and fraud, and using technologies just like Notions to do that. So, traditionally, insurers have been burdened by regulatory and product complexity, but that's really all changing, and we're so excited to be a part of that. Next slide, if that's possible. And I think what's really been great, and Notions has been a core part of this this movement that we've seen at IVP, is this use of data. I don't think it's surprising to anyone on the call that corporates have been sitting on a treasure trove of data for many, many years. It's just been very difficult to monetize and get insights that could help drive customer acquisition, strategic decisioning, all the things that we know we can get from data if it's used correctly. And so, as you can see here, and I mentioned it earlier, with the innovation that was happening earlier in the InsurTech landscape, you were sort of seeing, these sort of the use of data across the spectrum of the value chain is how sort of this slide is talking to it, right? So you have data around sales and claims processing sort of at the very beginning, and then as you're seeing data being leveraged more sophisticatedly, as well as the fact that IoT and certain areas are gathering more information to augment data that insurers already have in-house, you're seeing that more richer use of that data. And so that really, I think, is it really constitutes a major shift in how insurers are rethinking the whole customer experience, as well as the whole ability to leverage data in a much more meaningful and strategic way. So I think, Anthony, moving on to the next slide. All right, that's enough about me. I want to actually refocus now on the really wonderful things that Anthony, you and your team are doing around innovation around insurers. So let's first talk about, what's been going on within digital innovation among insurers. And I know you've been working quite a lot with a lot of global insurers across the world, specifically in Asia, as well as the US. So let's talk about what you're seeing, in the innovation space around there. I think before we get there, we all know that insurance companies have some difficult things to think about as they look at innovation, right? Where do I start? Do I rip out my IT systems? Do I need to set up a new digital unit? How do I attract the talent that I need? All of those things are come into play. So Anthony, what are you sort of seeing that's being done in that space with Notion?
Yeah, so I guess a little bit more context in terms of the kind of the companies we work with. We work with primarily multinational health insurers. We also work with regional health insurers. So MetLife and Prudential are some of the ones that it's already kind of declared out in the press. Some of the use cases that we deal with are more oriented towards claims and predictions in health. And so we do have a bias in terms of health predictions. So today's kind of topic will be from my perspective for health insurance, specifically in the digital innovation in this area. And so, just looking at some of the clients that we've come across and the digital innovation strategy that we see, I think it's very consistent what you've said before in terms of there's been a heavy focus on some of the automation of things that can have be done, be it more on the front office side, chatbots, these kind of things, to now a shift towards the I guess supposedly unsexy kind of things, which I think actually is pretty sexy itself. Dynamic underwriting. That's I think something really interesting. But I think the key focus here is that most of these digital innovation strategies are about 3 to 5 years old. And so we are in an environment where there are already strategies in place, and there has been investments and resources dedicated to an existing kind of structure. And from a predictive analytics side, we have seen insurers already working with some really kind of more baseline models that are more kind of like what we call traditional predictive analytics, or just basic machine learning kind of components. So that is kind of the environment that we're in. And so in this kind of environment where there is this kind of broad spectrum of homebrew solutions to kind of these initial efforts towards this digital transformation journey, there is an immediate need to kind of work with what they have already, but also coming up with something that goes a little bit beyond incrementalism, and that is basically something on the lines of what is truly transformational, what we can provide and what partners can provide to insurers.
Yeah, so you're really seeing on the ground there, collaboration as a pathway to innovation, right? Really working quite closely with the insurers that you mentioned to kind of leverage the internal data, but also augment and enrich from external data that you're getting around health. Is that a good way to think about it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that previous slide where we're talking about why now in terms of digital innovation, why we see this kind of explosion of both investments and also companies with a focus on working with these kind of partners, is because of that explosion of external data. And that external data, be it telematics, telemedicine, or just basic consumer behavior data or social media data, that's increasingly become an important strategy for insurers, not only from a data source perspective, but how specifically could you leverage that information and make it useful for some of the key kind of activities that different business units are using. And for us, obviously, that would be more on health-related predictions. What kind of health-related predictions can we be making with these kind of new alternative data sources? And that's where I think the drive is for innovation.
So in a situation, and I think you hit on a really interesting point, many insurers are saddled with some, behemoth legacy, as you call it, homebrew systems that are really difficult to maintain and cost millions to maintain. And the view from Notions is that you can actually make some significant incremental lifts by leveraging a partnership with you, as an example, in order to then kind of accelerate or facilitate a transformation journey, right? Is that sort of what are your conversations more towards that, or more towards, outright, like, we want to try to do this on our own?
So I think that's, that's a really good point. And the point here is being that everybody has their eye on that huge transformational journey, but in reality, these kind of digital innovation strategies need immediate returns. And by immediate returns, it really is focusing on the various components of that insurance value chain. And that could be, let's say, reducing claims fraud, detecting medical anomalies in these kind of claims. That would be very key and very good in terms of immediate ROI to focus on. And when you start establishing these kind of incremental lifts at the various kind of parts of the value chain, then you can start seeing the transformational outcome when it comes to introducing AI as this kind of centralizing component towards having a proper innovation strategy.
Yeah, okay, totally makes sense. So now let's dig a little bit deeper in terms of the space that you're particularly focusing on as a first goal, which is innovation specifically within the health insurer space. Can you talk a little bit about where you're seeing the use of data analytics to help make certain specific offensive, defensive, strategies that insurers need to take around fraud, as well as this whole idea of precision healthcare, right?
Yeah. So that's the current innovation hotspot. On the defense side, it's kind of like what we talked about already, detecting potential fraud, waste, and abuse. And this is a global problem. It's not only just a U.S. centric problem. It happens in every healthcare market. And trying to figure out how to do that along with straight through processing. This is more on the defensive side, where introducing technology like AI that we're doing is essential for seeing immediate returns. And the same idea, but this time thinking about using AI towards making health predictions, leveraging external data, that would be more on the offensive side. And that can, immediately start with, better premium pricing. If you start to understand disease groups and disease trajectories better, there is more kind of sense of value added services that you can be providing through health intervention or health engagement. And that's more like this kind of coordination of the activities that an insurer can do to really start increasing the number of engagement points with their clients, be it in group benefits or just even consumer insurance products in healthcare. Yeah.
What about the whole idea of consolidation or centralization of sort of innovation? Are you helping companies with that as well? And sort of what's been your view from where you're sitting?
I think most of the insurers that we've come across, everybody seems to have a very strong understanding and the need for this kind of de-siloing process when it comes to innovation. And so typically what you find in innovation strategies that are in its early stages with an insurer may be engagement with a couple of different solutions. But what you end up seeing is that those predictive models that are produced during those different kinds of business use cases are just siloed, and it's very limited to that particular use case. So what we see now is chief data officers and chief analytics officers working together very closely to really think about how could we centralize a lot of the efforts that are made, be it from the models that are created, to create this kind of AI engine where you could create a data environment very quickly, serve it, provision it to a particular business unit, and they could use whatever predictive models that have already been developed. And so this is kind of like the central thesis for a lot of these kind of insurers, even regional insurers. We're not only talking about multinational insurers who really have this kind of need across the different markets that they're in. But that centralizing force, that centralizing kind of core predictive capability, an AI engine, if you will, is something that we see as being very important. And indeed, this is kind of like one of our sweet spots of what we assist with, in the sense that our work goes across multiple healthcare markets. Our work involves understanding healthcare data in different markets, and our work involves creating models that are very can be applied to different business units as it concerns the prediction of mortality, morbidity in such markets.
Yeah. So if we think about it like much more pragmatically as well, it sounds like you're at Notions, you're really striving to take the complexity, if you will, and all, you know, complexities around the process, if you will, within your AI engine, and then surfacing it up and making it sort of easier to consume, act on, use to various business units, whether it could be underwriting, you know, precision, healthcare and wellness for that particular policy holder, as well as fraud. It sounds like it's really taking out that complexity. That's what you're.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
So when you go, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think one of the key things there is like when we say, you know, I like to think of health predictions as a kind of glue between an insurer in their various kind of units and the policyholder, because when you start knowing what a person's mortality or morbidity, there's just so much things that you can do, and you know, we can see if there's an anomaly, if this is like an outlier in terms of this particular case. We can try to start to understand, you know, how will this understanding change pricing? How will this understanding change engagement? You know, how will this change, you know, our engagement with different kinds of clients in terms of, you know, general consumers or very high net worth clients? Will this change the dynamics between, you know, the sales and the clients? And further, you know, how will this kind of predictive capability be built inside new products? And so that's kind of like, you know, one of the reasons why I think when we deal with health predictions with the insurers that we're working with, there is a great deal of kind of different scenarios that can be used that leverages the same kind of predictive models that we've been developing.
So when you're working with the insurers that of scale that you mentioned, I mean, typically, you know, how are you engaging with them? Because I think part of the challenge in optimizing on any AI strategy is the definition of where to start, right? Where do I go? Where do I implement first that I can get the optimal value for the way my business and my company moves? So how do you help them define that?
I think, you know, based on our experience so far, there's you know, several kind of themes that already emerge in terms of the use cases that our models could serve. And, you know, going into these sessions, these kind of workshops or discovery sessions with our clients really is trying to uncover what is the strategic priority in terms of their digital transformation strategy that they're focusing on, and leveraging some of the experience that we've built over the years to try to pinpoint a particular sort of use case that can generate immediate ROI and immediate return, so that this kind of evidence becomes, you know, almost like a source of inspiration internally for the insurer, because you know, introducing AI, you know, new technology is always difficult, and you know, getting immediate results and getting internal buy-in from the rest of the business units, that is super paramount. And you know, working with the insurer through that initial use case, then, you know, plotting out that strategy, plotting out that AI strategy to see how we're going to insert the AI in the various business units. And, you know, when that happens, you know, already you have something under your belt. Already internally, everybody is already seeing the kind of growth and evidence from that initial, you know, starting point that we begin with.
That's awesome. Okay. And I actually want to just pick on that just a little bit more in terms of just, you know, I think, you know, so I've been working with digital, I've been enabling digital transformations for quite a lot of insurance companies and banks and financial services. And I think the hardest thing that I find is the mind shift, right, of the companies. And, you know, we're getting there. We're certainly getting there. And you're seeing it in all the earlier discussions we had around corporate venture arms moving away and sort of figuring out where to kind of partner to accelerate their innovation strategy. But what are you kind of seeing in that in terms of, and specifically for Notions, when you go in and you're working with these, 200,000-year-old companies that are global, like how are you helping them sort of shift their mind towards what you can help them with, and where innovation, if done correctly, could actually facilitate their strategy a lot further along? How are you finding that culture shift?
That culture shift, I think, is it's a pretty interesting question, because I think from the default, the insurers that we're working with are very understanding, or very cognizant of the amount of work that is required when it comes to accessing external data. And this is very complex work that is born from strategic partnerships with these kind of data partners, that comes from continuous kind of maintaining of that ability to deal with that data. And the second part is actually having the talent to kind of work with that data, having that technology to deal with that data. And so the companies that we work with, these insurers, they understand that it is no easy feat, and that this is what we focus on. And because we're so focused on in this, they don't need to focus on that. And because of that, this kind of partnership emerges, where they come to us, where we have both an analyzed data and the technology to make use of that data. And the partnership really becomes, I think, a strong sense of an equal partnership when we start introducing the technology into their environment. And that's when I think some of the realization of how much work is needed when it comes to a mind shift of, oh, okay, today we have this kind of healthcare prediction. What are we going to do with it? And how will this change the business units that are operating on the front lines? What do they need to understand in order to make this work? And so that's, I think, kind of like the interesting point where that partnership really kind of becomes front and center.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful. So I know we a key part of what we were thinking about as we talked about the topics here is what actually drives what when we think about in terms of where the money flow is versus the innovation strategy itself as it sits within the insurance companies. And so I'll just say this, if you've been studying innovation as a field, what's very obvious is that you'll see some of that sort of consumer-driven innovation ideas come through first on the consumer side. So everything from the iPhone to social and all that good stuff. And it kind of flows over to business over time, right? Because you're seeing, that's typically how it works, right? You go direct to consumer, and then you kind of flow over to the business side. Mainly because you have to test something before you build an institution or a market around it. And then, of course, once the institution becomes lots of companies, and then the market becomes an ecosystem. So, when we look at sort of, okay, well, what kind of comes first? When these chief innovation officers and these chief digital officers are looking and watching, they're looking and learning where the outside, sort of like getting the best from the outside in, right? So much has been flowing into AI. I mean, Anthony, especially where you've been playing in insurance and healthcare specifically. And I think we all know that just like cloud in the early 2000s, AI is now a digital table stake for a lot of CIOs and CDOs. So, I'm curious, because you're sort of very early to the space around health and AI, especially with the spaces around claims and fraud. What are you sort of seeing, what in response to sort of that thought? Like, what actually is driving what? Is it the money flow? Is it the need? Where does it, what are you seeing?
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a strong kind of synergistic kind of interaction between what's out there in terms of the new companies that are coming out or being acquired, and there's also this kind of self-awareness or almost kind of a unique strategy that kind of emerges from the CIOs that we see, and it's a very kind of mutually informing process that emerges from that. And so in healthcare, just to give a more tangible example here. So over the past 5 years, you're really seeing the emergence of telemedicine, of sort of more kind of preventive health companies. You see the emergence of wearable health, and wearable data in health, and genetics companies. And so there is kind of this broad expansion of healthcare in itself as an ecosystem, the technologies that are there. And driving this, this emergence is actually also a huge amount of money coming from insurers, especially in the space of wearables and genetics data. So what comes from this is innate understanding that healthcare is very complex, and that and the insurer kind of needs to be front and center in terms of how to make use of this emerging new technology. How can these technologies be added into the products themselves, and how will that change kind of like product development over the next couple of years? And so, so far, I think the insurers that we've worked with have a even more clear understanding now in terms of how all the different pieces kind of fit in. I think broadly, everybody intuitively know the fact that the healthcare ecosystem has a lot of these kind of little components that need to be kind of explored and understood. But ultimately, that connection piece, I think they're really taking sort of a lesson from the digital innovation sort of maturity process that has already been seen in P&C insurance. And by P&C insurance, I will give a specific example of this where, we've seen in the early 2000s, companies like Climate Corp, which is essentially, they began initially as a predictive service for predicting rainfall and predicting soil and moisture for agriculture. And then, they developed this predictive system that then was introduced for immediate and direct underwriting for farms, for insurance. And so partnering with insurers, they developed a product for that. And then also this kind of back end, this back office that is completely automated that triggers the payout immediately. So what we're seeing is essentially automated underwriting, automated and immediate sort of a claims resolution, and this whole kind of predictive kind of core engine as being the very product itself. So everybody all the insurers are taking a look at that as an example and seeing, when will this happen in health? And if it does happen in health, what is the shape and form it will be in terms of that new product? So I think that is where a lot of the strategy is really coming from. It's like a very kind of circular, very synergistic kind of evolution of how we've seen trends evolve over the years.
Wow, that's very interesting. Thank you. I think so just moving on to the next topic, as we've got lots to talk about. We can talk about this all day. You've been working now with a lot of insurers. Can you share some interesting learnings around, the barriers and the responses to those barriers to digital innovation in their agenda, right? I think we alluded to it quite a lot through this conversation today, but I don't know if you could sort of surface a few that's been really impactful as you go and partner with the insurers.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a few that really just jump out immediately. The first one would be kind of like the strategic priority of digital innovation, of transformation as a strategy for the entire business. And, having that is really important, and having internal stakeholder buy-in for that strategy is even more important. From a very fundamental level, if let's just say, the goal is to introduce machine learning within the company, within literally the infrastructure of the company, then, resourcing and sort of hardware requirements are going to change. They will need GPUs now. They will need kind of processes, IT processes around governing models and how they're retrained and how they're sort of upgraded and refreshed over time. And these are new machine learning principles and workflows that essentially need a talent upscaling process. So having that is really important, and that is an overhead, but that is a necessary overhead for innovation. And that kind of just speaks to the shift of the insurer becoming more of a tech-driven kind of company, which is what almost every industry is kind of seeing as well. The second point, I think, would be, the whole concern of poor data, to begin with. So we know claims data extremely large in amount. With the clients that we work with in Asia, the data is even worse. So a lot of the kind of data that we work with in Asia, different languages, in healthcare, there's such a thing called disease coding and treatment coding. All of that in Asia is very inconsistent, and in different languages. There are supposed standards that, generally nobody really obeys. And so that becomes a really big concern. So when we kind of work with these insurers, they immediately, question, do we even have enough data? Is our data even good enough to begin this kind of thing? And the truth is, that data set that they're working with is from legacy. It is, 10 years, at least 10 years. It's probably from the earliest stages of their digital transformation journey. And so how do we work with that data? How do we even provision that data, cut the data so that it is available for data modeling? And this is kind of like the requirement for the insurer to really think about data lakes, about how to serve data. And this kind of falls within the provision of the chief data officer, if they have one. And the last thing I would say is regulation and privacy. So who's responsible for regulating innovation with external data? And how do we deal with this kind of understanding of anonymized data? Is anonymized data permitted in terms of the different kind of use cases that are required? And so this requires some understanding of governance in terms of the use of external data, the use of models, and such.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so just moving on to our last topic for at least this call. Lots of conversations further, but when you think about sort of what's the next frontier, we've talked a lot about the explosion of money flowing in, the specific areas around AI and machine learning, as well as just some of the early investments in customer experience and agent engagement. And now I'm very curious what you're thinking about in terms of what's next, right, for the frontiers of insurance opportunity within InsurTech. And I'll give my view quickly, and then I'm sure you've got a very interesting view on the ground that I'd love to hear about. I think the whole idea, and you're in such an interesting spot to capitalize on this, but the whole idea of data collection and data insights and surfacing is going to continue to explode, right? We know that in 2018, for example, there was an estimated, I think 253 million was the number I have here, but it's basically 45% of the population in North America has at least one phone or some kind of device that they use all the time. So the whole connectivity of device is just going to continue to make, a collection of health data, a collection of, financial habits, all of these things available. And to your point around that, there is a lot of complexity in not only collecting that, but making it usable and actually and maintaining that, right, in a way that makes, can offer turnkey solutions to insure companies. I think the other thing that the other area that continues to need ongoing innovation is the whole focus around a customer-friendly / product agile back-end processes. So any software that helps to kind of close that disconnect between the insurer and the client will continue to be interesting. I mean, frankly, I think when we talk to our friends in the ecosystem, that continues to be a trend. And then I think finally, really, I have some nice friends in places and CIOs and CDOs, and over 75% of them have some kind of large budget for AI as a cornerstone for their IT strategy. So I'm curious, Anthony, are these numbers correct? Are these themes what you're seeing on the ground, and sort of where would you see that play out in terms of the next major areas in InsurTech that we should be kind of thinking about?
Yeah, I think the focus towards the AI aspects of how AI can be used to automate and to streamline these kind of different kinds of front and back office sort of activities is tremendous. I think this is a central piece of insurance automation. But I think this insurance automation in terms of that sort of value chain for insurance products in general is really important, because at one point that automation it will become the very product itself. So the AI here is used to embed the complexity of the kind of the back office and front office activities into something that is simple and intuitive for both the internal users in these companies, but also to consumers, where it works and it's easy to understand, and moving that towards having whole products and whole strategies for engaging with consumers that's personalized, and that really embodies that spirit of it just works, right? This kind of idea. That's where I think the next frontiers of digital innovation is going to be going towards.
Awesome.
And I would add one more thing here, and it's that we're stepping into health insurance, and from my experience in Asia as well, directly here, is in Asia, where there is a large amount of sort of national health care, and where sort of personal insurance has taken the sidelines, and market saturation is still very low in terms of let's say in the case of China, where personal health insurance is less than 15% saturation in the market. And we think about the rising costs of healthcare that is borne by the government alone. This thing has to change. And as an insurer working in these kind of environments, traditionally the growth has been conversations around selling these kind of investment linked products, or these kind of almost savings oriented insurance products. But that's going to be changing towards actual health products that are going to be useful, that are going to reflect the needs of the people. And that shift from for an insurer from being a provider of financial instruments to an orchestrator of care is the basis of, I think, the next frontiers of digital innovation in health insurance.
I love that. I want to get care orchestrated for me. That's wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, I think that wraps up our conversation. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Anthony Lee, CEO of Notion Research, for joining us and giving us a view from the ground. And we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys.